back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. A few months ago, I had an historian here to talk about the history of the city of Charlotte, and he's back again. But today, Tom and I are going to discuss the role African Americans played in the making of Charlotte and what they did to make the city what it is today. Thank you for joining me again, Tom.
Great to be here.
You know, I don't even know where to start. So let's just start at the very beginning. I want to ask you, were slaves brought to Charlotte by the West Coast, the East Coast, or did they buy them from Charleston? How did they get to Charlotte?
I don't know the answer to that question or even really how to answer it. One of the things that people will say is that this wasn't the Deep South, so there wasn't much slavery here. And that's not true.
Oh, it's
there
not?
were lots of enslaved people here. In 1860, right before the Civil War, 40% of us were African Americans, and almost every one of those was an enslaved person. There was a small number of freed people, but slavery was very important here. How folks got here, I'm not sure. The typical place here where people worked, black or white, was a small farm. Big plantations, that was down by Charleston, it was down in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Here we had maybe half a dozen big farms that were kind of plantations, but mostly it was small farms, and it was a white family would buy an enslaved person somewhere, bring them with them as they came and settled. There must have been slave traders, but I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that that the African American presence here is very deep in the history. And you can see that when you go down to the square, the four statues at Trade and Tryon Street. One of them is an African American guy holding a spike hammer, building the railroads. And historically, between 20 and 40% of Charlotte population, Mecklenburg population, has been people of color from then until now.
I did not know that. So the slaves, when they were here, they did, is from what you're telling me, it sounds like they did a little bit of everything. Not only did they work in the fields, they helped with the railroad. What other jobs did they have?
The field work was the main work for everybody, black and white. Enslaved people, though, had a number of skilled occupations that nobody told me about until I really got into doing this. I figured there were people who worked in the house or there were people who worked in the field, but there was also a bunch of skilled artisans and people who did things with horses. Often African American males, there would be a skilled person who was the horse person on the farm. My friend Steve Crump, who does documentaries on African American history, talks about that as the genesis for black jockeys in like the Kentucky Derby and stuff like that. Here, in addition to that, there were African American builders. There's a guy named Thomas Day, who was a furniture maker and a builder in another part of North Carolina, who's very famous for having done much of the furniture at the governor's mansion. So there must have been people like that here. The thing that really intrigues me, though, I came to Charlotte as an architectural historian for the Historic Landmarks Commission, and I discovered there was a black architect here in the generation right after slavery.
Really?
Named W.W. Smith. Harvey Gantt, black architect. Right? Well, he's not the first. This guy, W.W. Smith, was here at the beginning of the 19th century, around 1900. And as I got into studying his history, he came up after slavery times, but the person he apprenticed with was a guy named Hauser, W.B. Hauser, who ran a brickyard and was a brick mason and had learned those skills in slavery times. So the skilled trades that African Americans had were very important. One more was barbering. There were no white barbers in this area 100 years ago. That was an African American job. And it was strange, though, in the days of segregation. There were black barbers who served black people, and there were black barbers who served white people. But often they didn't
do it together.
Yeah. The guy here who was very, very important was a guy named Thad Tate, And Thad Tate's land is where Northwest School of the Arts is now, the original West Charlotte High School. We have at Levine Museum of the New South, when you come downtown and visit us on 7th Street, we have recreated Thad Tate's barbershop. We have the sign that his family had passed down in his family, and we have some photographs of him and his family. We also have some artifacts from Walter Taylor, another multi-generational family that came up in barbering. I don't know what their deep history was, but barbers as important people in the African American community, that's a long and honorable history.
Wow. I'm speechless. I did not even know that at all. So the white barber shop, did it have white only sign, or was it just understood?
I think they must have, or was it understood? I really don't know. The whole thing of segregation, I came up just at the edge of it. And I can remember white and colored signs, but I don't remember people obeying them. That's my age. But the whole thing just seems so completely ridiculous. And it wasn't to be living under it, but trying to explain it to young people today, particularly in our society where now we have people of many different backgrounds and many different skin colors, and where would a Latino person fit into that world of white water fountains and colored water fountains? And then, a person from India and a person from Vietnam. And we are so, I think one of the reasons why we have taken off as a city and a region is we got rid of that.
Oh, really?
If we still had that kind of racial segregation, I don't think people would be coming here from around the world bringing their skills to Charlotte.
I'm not trying to stump you with this question, but during the Civil War, do you know if the African Americans fought at all?
Generally, African Americans were involved in fighting in the Civil War. There probably were some black people who fought on the side of the Confederacy, or at least helped out with their masters, because that was their job and they didn't have the chance to say no. But on the other side, on the Union side, there definitely were African Americans. One of the major black regiments was organized out of New Bern, North Carolina. Most of coastal North Carolina, if you haven't been to New Bern, it's right on the coast, and most of coastal North Carolina was majority African American.
Really?
And was for many, many, many decades. And when the Union forces came to New Bern and captured New Bern, black people from all over eastern North Carolina spilled into New Bern, saying, what can we do to help the Union effort? And so, black people very much involved in military organizing and rebuilding society. In fact, that's how the AME Zion Church got here. Charlotte is a major center for the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, and that's because missionaries came through New Bern during the Civil War and then found their way up into Charlotte.
I didn't know that. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the city of Charlotte after the Civil War, okay?
Excellent. Looking forward to it.
Okay.
I'm home, and I love it. I'm home. Where I belong.
It's always nice to come home, but many Americans are at risk of foreclosure and losing their homes. Making home affordable from the U.S. government has already helped over 1 million struggling homeowners like these. The sooner you act, the better chance we can help you.
I'm home, where I belong.
The world.
When you pick up a book
I used to read every night to all the younger kids.
and let your imagination break free, you won't believe how much fun it can be.
Let down your house!
Experience a world of adventure, excitement, and endless possibilities. Get tangled up in a good book. Explore new worlds. Read. Visit read.gov today.
And welcome back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. I'm here with Tom, the staff historian at Levine Museum of the New South. Now, Tom, before we went on break, we had talked about the Civil War. Now let's talk about what happened in Charlotte from the black person's point of view after the Civil War. What happened to them?
The time right after the Civil War, I think, was a time of tremendous hope for African Americans in Charlotte and across the South, because no longer were most of the laws there holding them down.
All right.
And that's really obvious, but imagine yourself in that situation in which the federal government has said, you know, you're a person, you're a citizen, you have full voting rights, you do not come into this situation with much education, but perhaps schools will happen. Johnson C. Smith gets it started at that point. The Freedmen's Bureau plants schools throughout the South. And so it's a freeing is pretty obvious word, but in every possible way. And in that first generation or so, W.W. Smith, the black architect I mentioned, by the end of that, he's building Grace AME Zion Church downtown. He's building the Mecklenburg Investment Company, next to it a building for black doctors and lawyers. By the turn of the century, 35, 40 years after the Civil War, there was a black professional class, preachers, teachers, and black businesses, black real estate developers, just like a flowering of society.
So where did these black professionals live? They just couldn't live in the white neighborhoods naturally.
Initially, this is a surprising thing. My PhD dissertation at Chapel Hill turned into a book called Sorting Out the New South City. And it's about how Charlotte became segregated, but it wasn't segregated immediately after the Civil War. It took a long time to begin to segregate. And you can see that right across from Levine Museum of the New South. We're at the corner of 7th and College Street, right downtown. Right across from the street from us is 7th Street United Presbyterian Church, which was built in the early 1890s by one of the leading black congregations. Stand on the front steps and you see Spirit Square, which is originally the first Baptist white church. And so a black church and a white church that close together. That was true of black and white people living in Charlotte until about 1900. In 1900, the city begins to segregate, and at that point, one of the great places to live was up around Johnson C. Smith. Johnson C. Smith University was a beacon. It was high ground, which was a good thing in an era when there weren't really good sewer systems to take away the storm water and all that sort of stuff. Didn't want to live down in the valley, wanted to live up on the hill. And so the area around Johnson C. Smith became a very desirable place. And the last few months, West Charlotte High School's been celebrating its 75th anniversary. West Charlotte High School originally was within what's now Northwest School of the Arts, which is just within walking distance from Johnson C. Smith. So that area of McCrory Heights and Washington Heights and the Excelsior Club, that was the place to live in the early part of the 20th century and well into the late 20th century.
Really? And so from what I'm hearing when you're saying that blacks during that time, it was pretty much like it is now, just hustle and bustle and going to work and taking care of things. But let me ask you kind of a touchy question. The KKK, was that strong here?
There's the Ku Klux Klan actually has different periods of history. The time right after the Civil War was when the Klan got started. And I was always told that the Klan was started by poor white folk. And the Klan was actually started by often well-to-do white landowners who were really angry at having lost their slaves. And so one of the centers for Klan activity in the years right after the Civil War was York County in South Carolina. Another was around Burlington in North Carolina. There must have been Klan activity right here. I don't know that specific history. But then it kind of tailed away and was reborn in the 20th century when the D.W. Griffith filmed Birth of a Nation, which was about how wonderful the Klan had been back in the days after the Civil War. And that reborn Klan was active in North and South Carolina. Again, I'm not sure how active right in Charlotte, but that legacy of anger is definitely part of our history.
You know, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about education and the Black experience during the time after the Civil War, the early 1900s here in Charlotte, okay?
Excellent.
Any questions?
What kind of service plan does this come with?
Unlimited.
Can I keep my same phone number?
Absolutely.
How do I change the ringtone?
Just hook it up to your computer.
Does it have a camera? What's the warranty? Does it come in silver? Can I put my party shuffle on this? Does it have a 3.5 millimeter headset jack? You sell a lot of these?
It's the one I carry.
You ever get those phantom vibrations in your pocket?
Any questions?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Ask questions. For the 10 questions everyone should know, go to ahrq.gov.
Explore new worlds. Read. Visit literacy.gov and let the journey begin.
Welcome back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. I'm here with historian Tom from the Levine Museum of the New South. Now, Tom, before we went on break, I said let's talk about the education system for African Americans after the Civil War. What really happened here in Charlotte to all the boys and girls or the adults that needed an education? What did the city do?
The notion that government should be involved in education was not strong yet. And so the first efforts were really private efforts. And just one example of that is Johnson C. Smith University, which began as Biddle Institute right after the Civil War. The Presbyterian church leaders, white Presbyterian church leaders, said that we have this newly freed population. It needs leadership. Let's found an institution to train preachers and teachers. That was the slogan for Johnson C. Smith. And initially, it wasn't really a college, it was a school. And as time went along, it kept adding grades and became a college and then became the university that we know. So that kind of private effort was very important. In terms of public schools, a couple of schools that folks remember, one is the Myers Street School. And that was the first, I think, public elementary school. It was in what was called the Brooklyn neighborhood, Second Ward High School, roughly where the government center is, very close in that area. It was a wooden building, two-story wooden building with spindly wooden stairs on the outside. And there's a wonderful picture of it.
Yeah, I've seen that
And folks
picture.
called it the Jacob's Ladder School, which had two meanings, I think. One is that in the song about Jacob's Ladder, that's a good thing to be able to rise that way along that ladder, but it also kind of made fun of the fact that the black folk got the wooden school with the spindly outside staircase. It was a way of laughing through adversity. If you go to the Harvey Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture, the outside of it, one wall has kind of this pattern on the outside, and that is to recall the stairs of the Myers Street School, the Jacob's Ladder School. So the Myers Street School was important, but the one that everybody remembers, if they're my age or older, is Second Ward High School.
I hear about that a lot.
What do you hear?
That it was the first high school?
It was indeed. First black high school.
And that's all. People just say that it was
built
the
in the
first
1920s, and at that point there were no high schools in the whole county. And folks were so hungry for learning that families would send their kids in to board with friends, neighbors, the minister, sometimes even with strangers, so that the kids could go to that school. And it was a school that carried you all the way through high school. and that school got torn down at the end of the 1960s. There was a federal program called Urban Renewal, which demolished the whole Brooklyn neighborhood. But there is still a Second Ward National Alumni Association. Their headquarters are up on Beatties Ford Road near LaSalle Street, and it is worth making an appointment and going and checking out the history at the Second Ward National Alumni Foundation.
You know, we've been talking a little bit about where people lived and stuff. What are some of the neighborhoods right after the Civil Wars or the early 60s, 50s, 60s that black people used to live in?
Well, that Brooklyn neighborhood was real important.
And where was that?
That was pretty much where the government center is, in the center city. There were a number of neighborhoods, the Cherry neighborhood over near Myers Park, the Greenville neighborhood, which also was demolished during urban renewal, but parts of it were built back. So those were important in-town neighborhoods. If you went out the west side, Biddleville around Johnson C. Smith University, named for Biddle Institute. Washington Heights, behind the Excelsior Club, was the first streetcar suburb, as far as we know, not just in Charlotte, but anywhere for black people. And it was developed in the 19-teens. Across the street was McCrory Heights, which was named for the same guy the McCrory YMCA is named for. Major president at Johnson C. Smith University. And then you went out and, I could just keep calling names. Dalebrook, out near the House of Prayer, University Park, out near West Charlotte High School. My favorite one I'd love to know more about are the Gospel Streets. If you go out near Lincoln Elementary School on Beatties Ford Road, there is St. Luke, St. John, St. Mark, and St. Paul. And I have no idea how they got developed, but I love the Gospel Streets. I just think that's I always feel at home around that way.
You know, let me ask you about segregation that had to happen where the black kids were going to go to the white schools. What was that like here in Charlotte?
Desegregation was tough anywhere. You kind of left that nest and had to go out into the world. I don't think it would have been an easy thing for me to leave an all-black school with black teachers and black student council and that whole thing and go to a white school where, frankly, I wasn't particularly wanted. But as long as black people were in a separate school system and white people controlled the purse strings, black people did not get a fair share of everything. And so the desire for people to come together was a desire for opportunity as much as it was a desire for social integration. And that starts in Charlotte with 4 students in 1957. In the 1960s, it's still largely segregated, and Julius Chambers files that lawsuit, Swan versus Mecklenburg Board of Education, which becomes the national test case for putting kids on buses, bring them together. And by the 70s, Charlotte is being written up in Time magazine as one of the most integrated southern cities. When Boston goes up in flames, literally goes up in flames, arguing over busing, the students come to Charlotte because in Charlotte you can see how it can be done, and they go back home and tell their parents, calm down, y'all. It's not so awful that black kids and white kids go to school. So a long history.
You know, and during that time, were there libraries just for black kids to go to if they needed to go to libraries?
Just about everything you could imagine.
Oh,
there
really?
There was a separate black and a separate white. Black people, of course, sat in the back of the trolley car, sat in the back of the bus. There were separate waiting rooms in the bus station, separate waiting rooms in the train station. There were even separate Bibles to swear on. You know, you go to the courthouse, you have to swear on a Bible. Separate Bibles.
Are you serious?
Harry Golden, who was a humorist in Charlotte, hated segregation, used humor to fight it. He told a story about an old black man who went down Tryon Street and went through every red light, stopped at every green light, went through every red light. Policeman pulled him over and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I saw the white folks using the green ones." And it was his way of making fun at this complete idiocy of separate. They called it separate but equal. It was just separate.
Did they ever have any sit-ins here in Charlotte like they did at the other cities?
Charlotte was a major center for sit-ins.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The sit-ins started in a big way in Greensboro. That's where they got on television and on radio and the newspapers. And Franklin McCain, who was one of the 4 original ones in Greensboro, he lives in Charlotte now. It's a great honor to Charlotte. But soon after that started, within days, Charles Jones at Johnson C. Smith University, who was the president of the student body, called people together, including B.B. Delane, who became very important in desegregating schools later on. And together they organized more than 200 students, first week of February of 1960, to walk downtown peacefully, politely, all dressed in their Sunday best, and sit down at the lunch counters. You know, you go to what's a lunch counter? Young people ask that question. You go to Walmart or Target today, and there's that little thing in the front there. Well, back in the day, black people could not sit down there. They had to take their food to go, if anybody would even serve them. And so what these students did was just to sit down and politely ask for a cup of coffee. And the South likes polite. And after a while, I mean, people did this day after day and month after month, but eventually the white South kind of got out-polited. They gave in. And that's when the world started to change.
So from all of this, you know, Charlotte, and you mentioned it the last time you've been here, we're so diverse. What lessons do you think we have learned from this experience? From, you know, so being separate, but now we're together, and all the things we had to do to get to that point?
I don't think we're done fussing over that.
You don't think so?
Which makes me sad. But I do know, for me personally, that the world is people of many different colors and many different backgrounds. And if you want to get along in that world, you have to know how to get along with people of different colors and different backgrounds. And I think Charlotte's business success is because we have a number of people who are good at getting along with folks of different colors and different backgrounds. And as long as we keep that in mind as we continue to build our society, I think we'll be a strong society.
Thank you so much for coming on my show again. I wanted to ask you so much more, but we are so out of time.
It's an honor to be here.
Oh my
you.
God, I have learned so much about the black experience that I had no idea what happened because I wasn't here during that.
Well, folks need to come down to
it.
Levine Museum of the New South because this history is something that we have on display every day of the year. We're open every day of the week. We're free on Sunday afternoons down at corner of College and 7th Street. So come on down.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I want to thank each and every one of you for watching today, A Better You, here on Public Access 21 every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Oh my God, thank you so much.